All right, welcome. Today I'll be talking about AMSCO Chapter 8 for AP European History. Chapter 8 is on the French Revolution, probably the most important chapter, in my opinion, from semester one of the most important moments in world history. And when we talk about years that you have to know, monumental years where history changes, kind of turning points in history, 1789, the French Revolution, one of those turning points in history. This is a longer lecture because there's a lot that goes on, so to kind of give you a sense of where we're headed. We'll talk about the causes of the French Revolution. We'll talk about what's called the liberal phase and then the radical phase of the French Revolution. We'll also talk about Napoleon Bonaparte. I should add him here real quick. And then the kind of big guiding question that's going to guide how we take notes today is, was the French Revolution part of the Enlightenment, or should it be considered part of the Enlightenment? So we're going to sort some examples as we go through of both enlightened and unenlightened examples. Now, before we can get to the French Revolution, we need to understand what France was like before the Revolution. We know that France had always had an absolute monarchy. Think about Louis XIV and how he sent his nobles to Versailles to spy on them, how he got rid of the Edict of Nantes to have Catholic unity, gave himself all of the power. Not only did the king have all of the power, but France had an incredibly old-fashioned, traditional, conservative social structure called the Ancien Régime. Ancien Régime is just the French word for the ancient government, or the ancient society, I guess. France used to be divided into 3 estates, or social classes. Whenever you hear the word estate, first estate, second estate, social estate, think of social class. So the first estate, or the first social class, was the church or the clergy. The first estate, the clergy, they had special privileges. They did not have to pay taxes, for example. The second estate, or the second social class, was the nobility, 2% of the population. The nobles also had special privileges. They did not have to pay taxes. They were able to access government jobs. And we know from our absolutism unit that nobles were traditionally born into power, so they inherited these titles from their fathers or grandfathers or whatever. But under the reign of Louis XIV, we do begin to see this new form of nobles called sword nobles, where they could actually purchase their title. They could purchase their title and office and position and all the privileges that come along with it. But the nobles in general, wealthy landowners, who have certain privileges, access to jobs, and no taxes. Everybody else is the third estate, 97% of France. So that's peasants, but that's also merchants, doctors, lawyers, shopkeepers, etc. And the way that France was set up back then, again, 1700s, was okay. They actually had a French parliament. The French parliament was called the Estates General, or État Général. The Estates General, that was the French Congress or French Parliament. And each estate had 1 vote. First estate, 1% of the population, 1 vote. Second estate, 2% of the population, 1 vote. Third estate, 97% of the population, but only 1 vote. And so you can already begin to imagine the kind of inequality of this government system. The first and second estate are exempt from taxes, and they can always vote together. So the third estate basically has no political voice at all. This cartoon does a great job of capturing those different estates. So we have the first estate, the clergy, and the second estate, the nobles, standing up top, with the third estate, the peasant, being crushed underneath. I like this because it shows physically where the first and second estates are, where the third estate is, but also the third estate is their foundation. If this peasant gets up and throws the rock off and decides not to work, well, these 2 guys are going to fall. They're going to collapse. And so I like to think of the third estate. The third estate is the foundation of the state. If they get up and move, the rest of France is going to collapse. And during the French Revolution, the third estate begins to realize their power. Now, when we talk about the causes of the French Revolution, again, I've got this key year here of 1789. There's a handful of different causes. First, from an economic perspective, there's an economic crisis in 1789. First, France is in debt. Now, a lot of that is because of King Louis XVI and his grandfather, King Louis XIV. So it's from wars. They built this massive palace of Versailles. They also helped the US out during our American Revolution. But regardless, France is massively in debt. They need a way to pay off that debt. There's also a drought and a famine. And because of that, the price of bread increases. So you have both an economic crisis for the government, and then you have an economic crisis for normal people. You can imagine if the price of bread increases, who's going to suffer the most? Well, it's the poor, it's the peasants who can't afford it. So there's an economic crisis, and then there's also a political cause, and it's basically the spread of the Enlightenment. You might remember the Enlightenment was based in Paris, France, but yet people reading these enlightened ideas did not have the ideas that they read about. Think about Jean-Jacques Rousseau calling for popular sovereignty. Government gets their power from the people, but yet King Louis XVI says he gets power from God. Think about Baron de Montesquieu calling for separation of powers, but yet King Louis XVI has absolute power. Think about Voltaire calling for religious toleration, but yet in France there is none. So with the spread of Enlightenment, this leads to criticisms of absolutism and their king, King Louis XVI. And there are calls for natural rights, popular sovereignty, etc. And then there's also just the inequality of the Estates General, where the third estate, 97% of France, has no power and no voice. So we have both an economic crisis and then these kind of long-term political ideas that are developing in France. Now, in terms of the French Revolution, 1789. 1789 is the year that you have to know. In 1789, the Estates General, the French Parliament, meets for the first time in 175 years to try to solve this economic crisis. And the third estate, the 97% of France, they bring some grievances to the Estates General. Now, the people going to the Estates General, they're not the peasants. They're the more wealthy members of the third estate. They were called the bourgeoisie, wealthy lawyers, let's say. They call for fair taxes. They call for a fair voting system. We should vote by hand. Every person gets one vote. And we need to reduce the burden for peasants. So I should maybe add here, for our causes of the French Revolution, the demand of the third estate. They want fair taxes, fair voting, and more of a voice. This begins the liberal phase of the French Revolution. There's going to be lots of key terms here. And the first key term we have to know is the tennis court oath. The tennis court oath, as it says here, is when the third estate is locked out of the Estates General. They go to their meeting place, they're ready to have their meeting, and the doors are locked. They've literally been locked out of power, locked out of having a voice. So what do? They cross the street, they go to a nearby handball court, and they take what is called the tennis court oath. The translation from French handball court to English became tennis court oath. And in the tennis court oath, the third estate promises to create a new constitution. So on June 20th, 1789, we have this majestic, epic moment where all the members of the third estate who have never really had a voice, they band together and they say, we will not separate until we have a constitution that gives us the rights that we deserve. Similar, I suppose, to the US's Declaration of Independence, the third estate declaring we will take power for ourselves. And things happen very, very quickly. The tennis court oath was in June 20th, on June 20th, 1789. You can see all of these key events take place in July, in August, and the summer and October of 1789. Now, you don't necessarily have to memorize all of these terms, but knowing a couple of them is definitely helpful. The storming of the Bastille is when Parisian citizens attack an armory, and they arm themselves. This is significant because it's the first act of violence in the French Revolution. Before this, it was just lawyers who were debating ideas. And it's also the first popular protest, meaning the first time normal people take to the streets. Now, a little bit of context, the reason why these normal Parisian citizens attacked the Bastille was because there were rumors that King Louis XVI was bringing his troops to Paris to put down the revolution. So they armed themselves. They kill the guards. Not only do they kill the guards, but they cover the guards' bodies in tar, throw feathers on them, chop the heads off them. They took the head, put the head on the end of a wooden pike, and then paraded through the streets with this pike with the guards' heads on top. Kind of a French Revolution tradition of violence and beheading these people. The big one is the Declaration of Rights of Man. I sometimes call this the Doromac, or the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. And this is the new constitution that we read last class. Guarantees equal rights, natural rights, popular sovereignty, fair taxes, etc. Some other key events. The Great Fear is when peasants throughout the entire countryside begin to rebel. And then the Women's March on Versailles, I always find interesting because this is women taking a stand. Well, literally, women march to Versailles. That's obvious enough. They're angry at high prices of bread and bread shortages. And they basically arrest the king and queen, place them under house arrest, and drag them back to Paris. And so what we have here is we have the people taking charge, both the lawyers, Tennis Court Oath, Declaration of Rights of Man, and your normal people, your Parisians, your fish women, literally the people who worked at the fish stalls in Paris, taking charge and demanding either more rights or food. So here's our image of the storming of the Bastille. Today, July 14th, is celebrated as Bastille Day in France. It's their Independence Day. They have fireworks and picnics and whatnot. And then a famous painting of the Women's March on Versailles. These strong, burly women with their maces and spikes and spears and cannons marching to Versailles 30 miles away to arrest the king and queen. Now, a new government is created. King Louis XVI is arrested, and the power shifts from the king to the people. And very quickly, the French Revolution moves away from its more liberal ideas, its more enlightened ideas, to a more radical or more extreme phase. This is called the radical phase from 1792 to 94. And a new group called the Jacobins take power. The Jacobins are led by Maximilien Robespierre. Maximilien Robespierre is he's a third estate lawyer. He was one of the leaders of the Tennis Court Oath, one of the authors of the Declaration of Rights of Man. And when he takes power, a couple of years after the revolution's begun, he begins to call for much more extreme change. He calls to abolish the monarchy. Not a constitutional monarchy that most people wanted, but abolish the monarchy. And you create a French republic. You might remember Jean-Jacques Rousseau called for a republic, but he was one of the only Enlightenment philosophers calling for that. This idea of giving the people all the power was still a very radical idea. Robespierre also called for a secular state, a non-religious state. Let's get rid of the Catholic Church, take all of the Catholic Church's lands and give it to the people, and create a new calendar as well. So let me actually add some years here. Liberal phase is 1789. Radical phase is 1792, or really 93 to 94. We have Maximilien Robespierre and the Jacobins take power. They abolish the monarchy. They create a French republic. They basically eliminate the Catholic Church. And they execute the king and queen. As if that weren't radical enough, things got even more radical during the radical phase, during a time period called the Reign of Terror. Reign means power or rule. And so this was the era when terror ruled, when terror was in charge. In order to maintain the revolution, the Jacobins and Maximilien Robespierre created the Committee of Public Safety. The Committee of Public Safety, or its initials COPS, C-O-P-S, was a 12-person group, not elected by the people, just 12 men, whose job it was to protect the revolution from its enemies, or to protect what they fought for. Now, this was 12 unelected people, so it basically becomes a dictatorship, and these 12 people basically used their power to imprison their enemies. to execute critics and to get rid of anyone who stood in their way, stood against their vision of a French Republic where they are the ones in power. In 10 months, 1793 to 94, over 10 months, 40,000 people are executed by guillotine in France. 85% of those people killed were from the old Third Estate. So the big question here, did the Committee of Public Safety actually protect the revolution from its enemies? Doesn't sound like it if they were killing the people that they were swearing to protect. Maximilien Robespierre is ultimately executed. He has been in charge of so many executions. These trials were incredibly unfair. You'd be arrested by the morning, you'd be put on trial and found guilty by lunch. No fair trial, no attorney, no evidence, just if they want to kill you, they're going to kill you. And by the afternoon, your head would be in a basket and you'd be dead. So Robespierre is ultimately executed. He's in his apartment. He knows that his old friends have turned against him. The people have turned against him because he got too power hungry. And so he decides to take his own life instead, takes a pistol out of his drawer, puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger, and does not kill himself, blows a hole through his cheek. So he's lying at his desk, bleeding profusely from his mouth. He knows that his friends are coming to get him. So he's on, I think, the second or third floor of an apartment, jumps out the window, breaks his legs, still does not die. Maximilien Robespierre lying in the cobblestone streets, a hole, gushing blood from his cheek, broken legs. He's arrested, dragged to prison, humiliated, just like he humiliated all those 40,000 people, and he ends up being killed by the guillotine as well. So the Reign of Terror, again, is this key moment in the French Revolution where the Committee of Public Safety, or cops, kind of like a 12-man dictatorship, they kill 40,000 quote-unquote enemies. I always like to think of this, well, think of Committee of Public Safety or the cops. Think about cops in the US. What is their goal? Well, to protect and serve. Just like the Committee of Public Safety, they said their goal was to protect the people. Do some cops protect and serve? Of course. Do some cops abuse their power? I think we see that all too often. So I think the Committee of Public Safety, think of them like the police, like cops. They say their goal is to protect and serve, but some of them abuse their power quite a bit. And this demonstrates the challenges of popular rule in France. Maybe they needed a king. Maybe they needed someone strong to keep charge. So we see some of these public executions here. You can see that they were gatherings. People would literally come from far and wide to see these executions. And then a couple of little memes here. Just because your job sucks doesn't mean you can't make it fun. Imagine a game of Plinko, maybe, with the heads. Or if you're a bowling fan, maybe you set up a bowling alley at the end of your guillotine. Anyways. Immediately after, or not immediately after, while all of this is happening, there's also a war that France is fighting. King Louis XVI, he was part of the old Bourbon family that had been ruling France for centuries. But his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, was from Austria next door. And so as the queen is arrested and eventually as the queen is killed, 1793, not surprisingly, Austria declares war against France. I mean, their princess was just killed. So there becomes this epic war, at first just between France and Austria, but most of Europe will join eventually. And France, in their notion of equality for all, they create a universal draft. They draft every single possible French, able-bodied French male. And they create an army of 1 million soldiers. Now, this is the biggest army the world had ever seen, or rather the biggest army that Europe had ever seen. Armies were normally 40,000, 50,000, or something like that. So to create a 1 million-man army was huge. Now, again, from the perspective of the French revolutionaries, this was equality. Every man will fight for their country. It's not just the nobles, it's not just the peasants, it's everyone. Whether you want to fight or not, I suppose that's not up for debate. You would have to serve. They also created a new calendar called the Thermidorian calendar. They got rid of our 12 months. There's no January, February anymore. There were 10 months of 30 days. I believe that there were 3 weeks of 10 days each. Imagine having to go to school for 8 days in a row, then having the weekend. And the idea of this new calendar was to make the calendar perfect, to make it rational and to use reason, and also to get rid of religion. You remember one of the goals of the French Rev was to secularize France. You can imagine how unhappy people were with this new calendar, upending everything they thought they knew. And in general, one of the trends that we see from the French Revolution is power shifting from the monarchy, King Louis XVI, to the people, to the mobs of Paris. So it politicizes the common people, or makes the commoners part of the political process. And so as part of that, the original goal of the French Revolution was liberty, equality, fraternity. Liberty meaning freedom, equality. Fraternity meaning brotherhood. But under the Reign of Terror, the goal really becomes kill the monarch, kill all our traitors, kill all the enemies. Okay, I'm going to get to that in a second. So anyways, there's war with Austria, and some of the old First and Second Estate, those powerful clergy and noble members, more than half of them flee to Austria. They're called emigres. They emigrate from France to Austria. So I'm going to kind of save this story of war with Austria for the second half of this lecture, but we'll get there in just a moment. And so the big question, and we're going to use this to sort through our first half of the lesson here. The big question is, was the French Revolution enlightened? Should it be part of the Enlightenment? I like to think, well, historians like to break the revolution down into phases. So the liberal phase, that's 1789, yeah, there are a lot of great enlightened examples. We have the tennis court oath, where the Third Estate promises to make a new constitution. We have the Declaration of Rights of Man, which is literally a new constitution that guarantees rights to all men. We also have the National Convention, which was the French Republic. So the liberal phase was a fantastic achievement of enlightened ideas. Sure, there was some violence over here, storming of the Bastille, you can put that if you want. But it was generally a huge celebration of enlightenment and of liberty. But by the time you get to the Reign of Terror, so the radical phase, this is generally 1793 to 94, let's say, we have the Reign of Terror that kills 40,000 people. You have the Committee of Public Safety, or the COPS. We have the de-Christianization of France, getting rid of the Catholic Church, basically. We also have some interesting ones, though. The draft. Is the draft an enlightened idea? Well, it's equality, maybe, but it's also forcing people to fight. That's not enlightened. Going to war to spread enlightened ideas, is that a good thing or not? Creating this new calendar that was supposed to be perfect, is that enlightened? Or is that forcing a new calendar on somebody? And so there's lots of, let me actually add some, maybe like uncertain ones. Center this here. So we'll say the forced draft for all men, I'll put a question mark there. The new secular calendar, I'll put a question mark there. And then the war with Austria to spread enlightened ideas. So that's the big question of the first half of the French Revolution. Is the French Revolution part of the Enlightenment? And what they're realizing, what the people are realizing is, well, maybe they actually needed someone to rule them, because when the people took the power, well, it led to the Reign of Terror. And so that brings us to the second part of this lecture. I'll pause here for a minute if you want to get these notes for the first half, the causes of the French Rev, pause here. And then the first half of our T-chart, pause here. All right, the second half of this lecture is on Napoleon Bonaparte. I know it's a long lecture today, but the French Rev is, again, one of the most important moments in world history, European history for sure. Okay, we know that by 1794, Maximilien Robespierre is dead, and that Committee of Public Safety that they created is kind of in shambles. Sure, the Committee of Public Safety, Robespierre, they tried to protect the people. They actually created laws that lowered the price of bread, and they created laws that arrested nobles and clergy members who were enemies. But they also killed 40,000 people, many of whom were from the old Third Estate. The most famous story was of an 18-year-old boy who chopped down a tree, who chopped down the freedom tree. It was some symbolic tree, and he was executed for chopping down a tree. And so by the time Maximilien Robespierre falls from power and is killed, and by the time the Reign of Terror finally ends, people kind of wake up. And they begin to realize, well, wait a second, why did we give the people all of the power? Like the people have never had the power. That was too much change too quickly. And so very quickly, a lot of people begin to think, well, why don't we have a more conservative government? There was a transition government called the Directory. We're not going to focus on that. We're going to focus on Napoleon Bonaparte, who becomes that more conservative government. A king, not just a king, but an emperor, more powerful than Louis XVI ever was. So Napoleon Bonaparte, he was an incredibly popular French military hero. He was from the Third Estate. He was from the island of Corsica off the coast of France. He grew up a peasant, and he rose through the ranks of the French military. Fought in the Revolutionary Wars against Austria, won many great victories. So Napoleon was a hero of the people. He was of the Third Estate, of the people. And in November of 1799, Napoleon leads a coup d'etat. A coup is an overthrow of the government. And so Napoleon on horseback with his military generals and commanders marches through the streets of Paris and takes power. It's a military coup, a military overthrow. And he immediately names himself temporary consul. Consul is like advisor, I guess. So I'm going to make myself temporary consul, temporary leader. But I'm only going to do that to kind of clean things up, fix things up, and then I'll give up power. What he ends up doing is he controls the laws. He controls the army. He controls foreign affairs. He is the executive branch. But Napoleon advertised himself as a strong, popular leader, a leader of the people, not as a king. That will change eventually, but that's how he viewed it. And he famously, or rather a French poet famously described him as confidence from below, authority from above. Napoleon was loved by the people. He was a military hero. The people gladly gave him more power. But the authority, the power, came from up top. So we're going to add some more details here, but we're going to say that he takes power in 1799 from a military coup d'etat, which again means an overthrow. In terms of why he's able to take power, well, the French government was weak. After the Reign of Terror, a lot of people kind of craved or needed a strong leader. And they thought that maybe the people cannot rule themselves. And he was a super popular military hero. He was loved by the people. He was not actually short. I know a lot of you are thinking, oh, Napoleon, he was a super short guy. He actually was average height. He was 5'6", which was average height for the time. But British propaganda described him as, tiny little puny Napoleon that we should crush. Anyways. Napoleon very quickly takes power and centralizes power. And the way that I'm going to take these notes here is I'm going to sort this into our T-chart of whether this is enlightened or not. So Napoleon grants universal male suffrage. He gives the vote to all men. That's certainly an enlightened idea. He also creates 2 legislative bodies, Congress. That's great. But there's that detail where it says Napoleon appoints all politicians. So he can appoint people who are only loyal to him. He also appointed the government agents. It also says here that tax collection is very efficient with no tax exemptions. Everyone pays taxes. Remember all the way back at the beginning, the third estate wanted fair taxes. Well, here it is. But he also creates a secret police and censorship to control his enemies and to control the people. He also re-allied with the Catholic Church, re-allied with the Pope. I'm not sure where that goes, whether it's enlightened or not, but he's trying to fix the problems that the Reign of Terror had caused. I really like this line here. He centralized power under a facade of democracy. So let's see. He centralizes power under a facade of democracy. A facade is a fake front. France looks like a democracy. All men have the vote. There's a Congress. But really, who's the one pulling the strings? It's Napoleon. So I should actually add that here. He centralizes power as kind of the big unenlightened idea. Now, Napoleon, again, does do some great things. In 1804, when he basically is emperor of France, he creates what's called either the Napoleonic Code or the Civil Code, which is one set of laws for all people. This is an enlightened idea. The idea that there should be one law that applies to all people equally, that's the Enlightenment. That's the Enlightenment dream. And so the Napoleonic Code, it abolishes all privileges. You are no longer born into power. Nobles have no special privileges. He creates a meritocracy. Think about Peter the Great back in Russia in the 1600s. France is now doing the same thing, a meritocracy. Not based on how you're born, it's based on your merit, your skills, and whether you deserve it. He also says peasants can now own property. It's a huge win for the peasants who used to have to work as laborers on someone else's farm. He also creates state-run high schools, spreading education to all Frenchmen. So I suppose you all can blame Napoleon Bonaparte right now as you learn history from home. He's the one who created a state-run high school. Sorry about that. But he also used those state-run high schools to spread propaganda, to spread a patriotic message of how great he was. And he also used the Napoleonic Code to create a patriarchy, a male-dominated society where the male has total authority, where the woman cannot do anything without the father or husband's permission. They cannot divorce. They cannot own property by themselves. They cannot go to court and sue anyone, even their husband, without their husband's permission. So you can imagine how backwards that was. So the Napoleonic or Civil Code, I'm going to put it in both sides, and then we'll add some details for how it's enlightened or not. It's enlightened because there are no more privileges. There is a meritocracy, and peasants can own property. And there are state-run high schools. Fantastic. But at the same time, men have complete authority. Women cannot divorce or sue or do anything without the man's permission. And very quickly, Napoleon becomes emperor. Sorry about that. 1799, he declared himself temporary consul. By 1802, he named himself consul for life. And by 1804, he gets rid of the entire notion that this is a democracy. And he just says, you know what, I have all the power. He names himself Emperor Napoleon I. Napoleon, quite ironically, ends up having more power than the absolute monarch Louis XVI ever had. So the people killed a king, and a decade later replaced him with an even more powerful emperor. But remember, Napoleon was incredibly popular. The people loved him. Every single time Napoleon wanted more power, he would issue what's called a plebiscite. A plebiscite is an old Greek term for a public vote. And every single time Napoleon would issue a plebiscite, he would ask the people, should Napoleon gain all of these extra powers for life? 99% would say yes, absolutely. Some of that was because he was incredibly popular. Some of that perhaps was because of censorship and the secret police and fear. So it's hard to know exactly how popular he was. But again, there was this facade of democracy. He made it seem, sorry, not made, he made it seem. He rose to power through democratic means. He never did anything illegal to take power. He changed the laws, and he convinced the people to give him more power. When we study Hitler in a few months, we're going to see a very similar trend here, where he takes complete power through democratic means. Because he's popular, because he wins these plebiscites or these public votes. So Napoleon Bonaparte, Adolf Hitler, two examples of popular heroes who rise to power through democratic means to take total power. Now, Napoleon's reign was not all fun and games, I suppose. He ended up fighting a massive war with the entire European continent and in Haiti. In 1791, Haiti, which you can see right next to Cuba, so it's off the coast of Florida in the Caribbean, Haiti was a French colony with a huge slave population that worked on sugar plantations. The slaves in Haiti rebelled, and they declared independence. They killed their French white masters and took power. The French Revolution was very, they kept on changing their mind on where they stood on slavery. Based purely on what they should believe in, I mean, the French Revolution, the Declaration of Rights of Man guarantees equal rights for all, they should be against slavery. So you can see in 1794, they abolished slavery. But when Napoleon took power, Napoleon very quickly realized, well, hold on a second, we need those slaves. We need the wealth, the money that they would make from their sugar plantations. So in 1802, Napoleon reinstated slavery, sent troops to Haiti to take the colony back. And in a humiliating defeat, Napoleon was defeated by this small island nation of Haiti. So the Haitian Revolution is interesting for a lot of reasons. Number one, it shows the complexity of the French Revolution. Do they believe in slavery? Can they be a free enlightened people if they have slaves? And then once Napoleon loses this revolution, once he loses Haiti, his vision of a worldwide empire is gone. He basically has to sell all of his French colonies in America, called the Louisiana Purchase, and he focuses now on Europe. So I am going to add this as a non-enlightened idea, where Napoleon reinstates slavery, and he fights in Haiti as an example of a unenlightened characteristic of Napoleon. Our last 5 slides, though, is going to focus on Napoleon's Wars, and this will be a separate bullet point, separate from that T-chart. Napoleon created a massive French empire. This is the immediate French Empire. France, stretching up to Belgium, Netherlands, stretching down here into modern-day Italy as well. There's Corsica, the island that he was born on. But Napoleon also controlled many regions. He controlled Spain, and he controlled Germany and Switzerland and Italy and the Ottoman Empire and Poland over here. And he had allies in Austria and Prussia. By 1810, there are only 2 countries in Europe who are still fighting against Napoleon. England, Great Britain, an island nation that he could not conquer, and then Russia, a country so vast, again, that he could not conquer it. Now, why is Napoleon fighting against all of these countries? Why is he fighting against all of Europe? Napoleon's goal is world domination, European domination. Everybody else, well, they don't want a superpower. So England and Russia, their main motivation for fighting against France is balance of power, preventing one country from getting too powerful. Cool. So I'm going to add this up here. So his Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon's goal is to create a massive grand empire in Europe. He does that. He tries to create this empire through war, through alliances, and through appointing family members to rule in these places. But he demanded complete obedience within his empire. Napoleon had two quotes that kind of captured his ideas. He said, first, Europe cannot be at rest except under a single head. Europe needs one ruler. And if Europe has more than one ruler, there's going to be wars and chaos and violence. So I'm actually going to war to bring peace. He said, in fact, I want peace as much to settle the present French government as to save the world from chaos. And so from the twisted mind of Napoleon Bonaparte, he thought he was going to war to create peace and stability. What he actually did is create massive chaos and violence and war, but he thought he was trying to create peace. Quite interesting, though, separate from the actual war himself, or the war itself, when Napoleon went to war, when he conquered each territory in Spain and Germany and Italy and elsewhere, he spread his reforms with him. And so when he conquered Spain, he brought the Enlightened ideas there. When he conquered Germany, he forced them to adopt the Napoleonic Code. He also brought the powerful centralized state with him. And so this is always the fascinating part about Napoleon. There's that question at the end that asks, was Napoleon the last enlightened absolutist? He was an absolute monarch for sure, but he also had many enlightened ideas. So I'm going to say here that he spreads many of his enlightened ideas to Europe as he conquers each one. So kind of like the enlightened idea, we have the Napoleonic Code, no privileges, equality before law, religious toleration, it says. But then there's this more absolutist ideas of a powerful centralized state. He demands obedience. And he does all of this through war. And so again, this big question of, is he an enlightened absolutist? I don't know, but we'll leave that as a question. And so this is what makes Napoleon's legacy so complicated. Did he spread equality and freedom and natural rights throughout Europe? Absolutely. Napoleon was perhaps one of the most important people in spreading the ideas of the Enlightenment beyond France. But he did it through force. He did it through violence. And so where does Napoleon stand on this T-chart? I don't know. I should actually add here, he spreads enlightened ideas through war. But again, I'll just say but he does this by force, by war. It's a complicated, fascinating character. To get to the end of the story here and Napoleon's eventual defeat. Napoleon tries to defeat his last two countries. Now you see again here, Russia, England, Austria, Sweden, Prussia, they all fought against France. Actually going to keep both of these up here. So let's see here real quick. Let's say, give myself some space here. So most of Europe fights against Napoleon. Their goal here is a balance of power. And England and France are the two main enemies that stand against Napoleon. Now, Napoleon, a lot of these military victories, a lot of these victories were military victories. Remember, they had an army of 1 million soldiers. To defeat England, though, that's a whole different beast because England is an island, a lot harder to invade. And so Napoleon creates something called the Continental System, which is basically a agreement from all of the countries in Europe that Napoleon controls to refuse to trade with England. They're trying to starve England out, so England doesn't have any access to trade from Europe. Now, England can just turn to the Americas and trade with us, or trade with Latin America. England also kind of sneakily sneaks past and still trades with some of their European allies. So it ultimately fails. And not only does it fail, but it backfires. It destroys the economy in Europe, in continental Europe, because they cannot trade with their biggest ally, England. And a lot of Europeans begin to resent Napoleon. They're like, well, why are you telling us who we can or cannot trade with? We're losing money because of you. And it doesn't actually work because England just trades with Latin America. So we have this failed continental system, which leads to kind of resentment and anger from Europeans against Napoleon. So Napoleon's ultimate collapse is a military defeat. Napoleon attempts to invade Russia in 1812. He doesn't actually invade during the winter, he invades during the spring. But if you know anything about Russia, the land is massive. This is before railroads. There are no railroads in Russia. And so the French forces get bogged down in Russia. When winter comes, they have really no easy way to escape, no easy way to get reinforcements or supplies. And Napoleon loses 300,000 soldiers in this failed invasion of Russia. Hitler will do the same thing. When Hitler in World War II tries to take over the world, his ultimate military defeat is a failed invasion of Russia. So when y'all are at home, please promise me if you ever become, an evil dictator hell-bent on world domination, please make sure that you do not invade Russia during the winter. Or if you do, at least bring a nice winter coat. After this failed invasion of Russia, Napoleon's on the retreat. This inspires all the other people fighting against Napoleon to fight back. And by 1814, Russia and Prussia enter Paris, and they force Napoleon out. They exile him to the island of Elba. Napoleon is still going to have one last stand. He's got one last great reunion tour. He gets all of his friends and bandmates together. They go on a 100-day reunion tour. They play their greatest hits. He tries one more time to take power, and this time is defeated by England and Prussia at the Battle of Waterloo. He's exiled one more time, this time to an island farther off the coast. This time he doesn't have any friends or allies with him, and he dies of stomach ailment a few years later. So he's finally defeated by England, Russia, Prussia in 1815. Another one of those key years, 1815. Now, the last thing I want to talk about maybe is the legacy of Napoleon. Because again, he spread enlightened ideas, absolutely, throughout Europe. But he also inspired the rise of nationalism. Every country that he conquered, people were not happy about being controlled by a foreigner. And so many Germans, especially, and Italians, controlled by Napoleon, they begin to rose up and they begin to fight for self-rule. So the Germans and Italians, they unite and they fight against foreign rule. This is going to be important because it leads to German nationalism and Italian nationalism. This idea that Germans should be a united country, that the Italians should be a united country. And it's going to lead to the unification of these states. It's going to lead to the country of Germany and Italy in the 1870s. So this is just kind of teasing a point later on. Okay, my goodness, that was a long lecture. Let's check out our causes of the French Rev, the liberal phase and the radical phase. Please pause here if you need it. Remember, the French Rev begins as a fight for democracy, but very quickly devolves into chaos. And then we have this fascinating character of Napoleon Bonaparte. And then the big question, was the French Revolution part of the Enlightenment? I don't know. It seems like we've got equal examples on both sides.